Welcome everyone to Your Desk University, bringing you live learning with AEC tech experts directly to your desk. Wow, this has been so much fun, hasn't it? We've got 20 shows, and we're at I think number 13. And tonight we're going to be learning about Dynamo and Git and Python. If you are a Dynamo user who just wants to step up your game just a little bit, I think you'll find this particularly fascinating. Tonight's going to be a project story, so we're going to be going through some pains and successes that our users have experienced. And I won't take the entire intro from you. I'll leave the rest of it for Dana. But before we get started, don't forget to connect with us. If you go to our website, go to the bottom of the page. We'd love to see you on Slack. It's a great way to connect with both us and the speakers and other people in the community. We do want to bring people together. We want to bring this AEC tech community together during this season. It's been hard. We're all working from home. Sometimes it's been easier and harder, but conferences are getting canceled. Conferences are going online. I'm wearing my We Make shirt. I got at Autodesk University last year. I know Built, announced that their conferences are either getting postponed or going, and so we just want to kind of help fill that spot, and we'd love to connect with you in that way. If you haven't seen on our website, we have posted a couple new sessions. There's definitely the one with Autodesk, Dynamo, and the Dynamo team is going to be sharing a little bit more for people who've been using Dynamo already for a while. Some of the nitty gritty pieces that you might find helpful. And then we have Andrew Human, who's going to do a masterclass on Grasshopper tree structures. So with that, I'll let Dana take it away as our host. She's a #1 speaker at AU. If you haven't met her, she's really a great person overall, and she comes from Smith Group. And with that, Dana, thank you so much for hosting, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Timon, and always thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. As Timon mentioned, my name is Dana. I'm a BIM technologist at Smith Group. Your Desk University series finished off the second week of June, and we are finalizing the details. So make sure you check out our website. So just a few weeks left. As Timon mentioned, 13 of 20 really, really wonderful presentations. If you haven't seen them, of course, you can check out Your Desk University or, of course, YouTube. Once again, thanks again for joining us tonight. Please also join us Thursday for a presentation on the rise of data-driven design processes. Another presentation series you should be aware of is BIM XT Network. The first presentation will actually be tomorrow, Wednesday the 20th at 1 p.m. EST on working from home in BIM 360. So please tune in. You can check them out on Meetup. We'll post that on our YouTube comments or somewhere there. As Timon mentioned tonight, we have an awesome presentation. Jeff and Courtney from AECOM will be talking on Dynamo, Python, and Git. They will walk us through a project where they obtain information from a Revit link into their own model. So now on to our speakers today, Jeff and Courtney. How are you guys doing?
Hey, I'm doing good.
Awesome. How you doing, Jeff? I'm muted there. The beauty of video chatting, right?
Yeah.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about what you do outside of BIM, maybe what you've been filling your time with during quarantine?
I've we just started putting in a garden at the house here. So I've been doing a bit of that, trying to get out and stay active.
Nice. I hope the weather holds up for you. It's been really, really wonderful.
Yeah. I don't know
in DC. I know you're in Arlington, right? So
yeah.
Arlington, Virginia.
Strawberries will make it this year, but we'll see. So
yeah, and I think Courtney, you're joining us from Roanoke, Virginia today, correct?
I am. It is supposed to rain here all week, but
oh no,
I have been helping my parents prep for both of my brothers' graduations from high school and tech. Well, for Virginia
goodness.
Tech, so.
Oh, I went to Virginia Tech. I'm a Hokie.
Oh,
you can't see it, but my diploma's hanging right up there. So go Hokies, go Hokies.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. I'm sorry they had to graduate in such a strange time. Well, so can you guys tell us a little bit about how you guys are using Python, Dynamo, and how you're collaborating with Revit links within the office? at AECOM.
Sure. Guess I'll share the screen here. I think to kind of get started, and we just touched on some introductions there. So I'm Jeff, and there's Courtney. I'm an architect with AECOM, and Courtney is an interior designer with AECOM as well. So the overview here. And maybe Courtney, I don't know if you want to take a minute and kind of talk about the problem and how it came about.
So we came to Jeff with a problem and a couple other people at AECOM that we have a furniture spec sheet that we have to fill out to place each furniture piece within each room so that the contractor knows where it needs to go. It's a manual process where I have to go through and manually count each and every piece of furniture in every room and then document that in an Excel form. And we were just looking for something that we could do in Revit that would do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good overview of the problem, and we'll unpack each one of these a little bit more, but this is a general overview of this section of the presentation. So,
essentially, the reason we're having to do a lot of that manual transcribing is because it's in a link, right? We have the architectural rooms and a Revit model that's linked in to our furniture model, correct? So we don't have actual rooms in there.
Right. Revit has a bug where it won't read if a piece of furniture is in that room, if the room is outside of the physical model where the furniture element is.
I always like to joke that's why I have a job, right? Because Revit has these limitations. So I can't wait to see how you guys solve this problem.
Yeah. So we'll keep moving forward here. So that overview of the problem, right? And a bit more detail on the project itself. So it was a pretty large scale project with an aggressive schedule. We were going from, starting that initial charrette and developing the design to having construction documents in less than a year. And so it's a very aggressive schedule. And that was, the project itself had over 25 buildings and hundreds of rooms. So to that second point there on the slide, Revit out of the box couldn't really do what we were asking it to. And as Courtney had mentioned, it was a pretty repetitive task to go through. So starting to work towards a solution, and certainly not the only one, but trying to find a way to kind of tackle this. There were a couple of elements here. One of them, right, collaborating between our offices, so working together as a team. Adding in some project parameters so we could track those values that we needed to. And then that third point there, dividing that model into quadrants, that's a bit more of a technical, maybe a stumbling block we had with a larger model. And the implementation there. So then how did we start to send that out to the wild after we worked together as a team and kind of tested it in a few cases there. So to this slide here, collaborating between our offices through GitLab, and we'll unpack that point about GitLab a bit more in the second half of this presentation, more of a technical deep dive. But in this scenario, the Arlington and the Roanoke offices were collaborating together on development and testing. So we had myself and a few other people down in the Roanoke office using GitLab to start to develop some code together, which seemed to be pretty compelling and trying to push the envelope a little bit in that way. Courtney, could you talk a little bit about adding in that project parameter for the families?
Sure. So we initially started the process by adding a parameter to each furniture piece in the model that would store the room names and the room numbers. This was part of our manual way we could fix it, but we hoped making these parameters, we could use those to automatically fill them. So we applied this to the furniture parameters within Revit, which then we could copy and paste from each building to another, and the project parameter would come with it. So it was an easier process than we had hoped. So.
And maybe to that point, just to hit on the FF&E package. So I think you had talked about it a little bit, Courtney, but for some people who might not know, can you kind of explain what an FF&E package is, or I guess why we needed to have this information with each furniture family?
So FF&E is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. It's anything that if you turn the building upside down, that will fall out. So any furniture, any clocks, tack boards, marker boards, anything from a television mount, copiers. So the importance of knowing where they're going is important for the contractor and for the furniture installer to know exactly where to send that piece of furniture with once it gets on site and how many to order. So it was really important that we got these rooms right, because if you send it to the wrong room or the wrong building, even, that's something where you have to go figure out where it went and then take it to the correct spot.
Yeah, it's I think something that maybe not every discipline touches, but definitely a lot of information and a lot of work that goes into it.
Regardless, we all link in the architectural model, right? So all of us have to interface with, unless we are the architect and maybe we don't, we only have one model, which is even rare for them, right? Sometimes they'll have a shell model and a core model that are separate, right? And of course, our other disciplines, MEP, structural, they're linking in the architectural model. So I can see everybody wanting to obtain some sort of information. And I think the Revit rooms is probably pretty common, right? We typically want to know what those names and numbers are. So whether you have a piece of furniture or whether you maybe have like a mechanical equipment or electrical equipment family, we could think about it in the same way, right?
Right. Yeah, I think trying to make the models talk to each other a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I think that it's very common for the FF&E model to be a link. I know that at Smith Group, that's how we do it as well. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. Maybe on that point, Courtney, I'm sure you know where some of those models can get pretty big with lots of furniture, and those families can be pretty detailed.
I mean, yeah, we had over 300 different pieces of furniture. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
and of course, every time the architect wants to go and change that room number or change the room name, right, you're going to have to go and hunt that down. And that's not easy, right? That takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. Trying to make it maybe a little bit more of a smoother connection there between the two. So this diagram here, just kind of explains that point that Courtney was talking about how the furniture families traveled between the models, and that's how those parameters traveled with them. And on this point, so we had this parameter set up for each furniture family. So we had sort of an empty bucket where we could, put those room names and room numbers with them. And this is maybe one of the stumbling blocks we had. So you could imagine with these larger models, you could have, 100 or a couple hundred rooms, and just as many furniture families to be tracking in there. And so that can be a pretty large transaction. And it was pretty computationally intensive. And so in an effort to keep the team moving and to keep the progress moving, we started working towards this I guess, solution here. And the basic idea for it was to kind of break down the transaction. We could break the model into quadrants. And so we'd first get the bounding box of the whole model, and then we get the location point of each furniture family. And we sorted those furniture families into 4 lists, depending on which quadrant they were in. And that helped us with those larger models to be able to process those transactions in a reasonable amount of time. And then
this is also sometimes a client request. They'll come back and say, can we number the elements based off of what quadrant they're found in? So it's not even necessarily a far off request for documentation either. But I can definitely understand for the speed of your Dynamo scripts wanting to break it down this way.
Mm-hmm.
So is it an additional by quadrant and by level?
We looked at it that way. We ended up just doing it by quadrant. These buildings were relatively low rise, so only 2 or 3 stories.
Okay.
But certainly that's another way that we could break it down.
Sure.
So in terms of the implementation here, so how we started to kind of break into it and work into it with those Dynamo scripts, we had these test models set up. So this image on the left on the slide is there's an architecture model which has that gray pochade walls, and then that interiors model has the furniture pieces like chairs and tables. And we used that model just to test it out. And that model actually traveled with the Git repo. And so when we had a new team member come on, or even just to kind of update the work that we were doing, we had the model put up there. So you had sort of a test environment together with the actual script. So as you're debugging, you could both have the same Revit model to be working with. And here, and then in the image on the right, there are those 2 parameters we had added in for testing. So tracking that name and number there. So at this point, we'll start to pivot into more of a technical deep dive. So far, it's been general concepts and ideas. Now it's going to get a little bit more, I guess, on the technical side of the house. So that third point at the beginning of the presentation, so what's technically compelling about this, right? So using GitLab and GitHub Desktop, that was pretty compelling in terms of how we could have different users collaborating in between offices and working on code together. Again, with a very aggressive schedule, trying to develop the code fairly quickly, seemed to be a good way to go. And that kind of bleeds into that second point there. So collaborating on the functions and how you could have maybe a copy paste option, or maybe there's a more nuanced way that you can connect that code to Dynamo. And then this third part here, which I don't know, it's my personal soapbox with these dialog boxes. But Courtney, maybe you can talk for a second on that about in terms of having to interact with the Dynamo script and having to type in the model name versus having some type of a prompt.
So the dialog boxes really helped me be able to teach other people in our studio how to use the code and the script, because it was an easy drop-down menu where you go and you pick which architecture link you need to pull from, you change the name there, and then you can change which quadrant you wanted to pull from. And it was a very simple visual to it that you could tell even somebody that had just come onto the job, can you look for all the furniture in quadrant 2? And they could go and pick the options they needed and run the script.
And I think that's key, right? I mean, I think creating tools is one thing, but creating tools that are intuitive and tools that people aren't afraid to use is what makes them functional, right? We can make tools all day long, but unless they're friendly to the user, they're probably not going to use them, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very good move on that.
So to that first point there, to unpack that a little bit, using GitLab and GitHub Desktop, GitLab, that's the direction we went. Certainly some projects use GitHub, but GitLab seemed to be more friendly to our team in an enterprise environment. GitLab, I think, is a bit more friendly with keeping your repositories private or internal within our own team. And GitHub Desktop, that helped us with visually managing the code instead of using bash commands. And to illustrate that point, in GitHub Desktop on the left here, it's a bit more friendly with buttons, and you have, in dialog boxes where you could type in, any type of comment you have to go with your commit. Versus something like on the right with that, more of a bash command. Both are valid and they both get you to the same place, but using GitHub Desktop was a pretty well, it was a way for us to flatten the learning curve with Git, get people collaborating sooner. And to that point about collaborating, so in this method, we ended up just copying and pasting the code that we were developing together into the actual Dynamo node. Again, we only spent a couple of hours working on the code, so it came together pretty quick and it was kind of hacky. But there are more nuanced ways to do it. This image on the right kind of shows where you could have an import statement and a Python file that travels with that Dynamo script, and you can manage the Python code in there instead of having to actually, copy and paste it in. And I think on this point as well, generally speaking, to using Python, this was helpful for us to avoid having a lot of dependencies on packages, or even managing differences in Dynamo versions, which can be a real pain. I'm sure, as everybody's aware. So it was a way for us to help mitigate that. And then this third point here, so these IronPython dialogues, and excuse me, this is kind of my personal soapbox, but excuse me. So more typically in a Dynamo script, you'd have something, like this node here in the purple, where you'll have a code block and you have some string input, and the user might have to engage with that in some way, maybe typing out a family name or a project name. And those names can be kind of long, and they're more computer friendly, not necessarily user friendly. Versus doing something like a dialog box, which most users are fairly familiar with. And this book on the left, the red circle there, they have some pretty good examples. If you're looking for something to, if you can't sleep and you want something to read, I'd recommend this book. It's not necessarily the most accessible, but there are some pretty good examples in there. And the bottom line, I think, with this is to say that using these dialog boxes can make it more accessible for the user, and it can streamline your input, so you don't have to validate input as much. If they just check a box, you can be pretty sure that you're getting the input that your script needs, and the user just has to check a box, which is a little bit easier than typing out some long string.
How would you say this is in terms of sharing content? I know that you have the copy paste method, but I know certain times that managing packages, ensuring that everybody has packages, that can be a definite bear, right?
Yeah.
But if you're able to, working with Dynamo out of the box nodes can certainly be a lot easier than worrying about everybody having the same code or deploying packages or what have you. So can you talk a little bit to that point?
Yeah. So, I think that packages help us when we're starting to work our way into a problem. Certainly, we don't have to recreate the wheel, and there are advantages to that. But a challenge, as you just mentioned, is that if certain users don't have those packages or dependencies, then the scripts
or an outdated version of it, right? Or whatever it might be.
Right. So that can be a real challenge or a roadblock, especially if you have a new user who isn't maybe as comfortable in a Dynamo environment, and then to have one more problem come up, sometimes that can be a real challenge.
Right.
But as you had mentioned, using Dynamo nodes out of the box, those are definitely preferable because you can copy and paste those around, or you don't need to manage any type of package.
Sure, they're much more stable.
Right. And maybe another extension of that, and what we had tried to do here is to just use a Python node, just working in Python. What that allowed us to do, we're pretty clear on what we wanted to do with the model, so it helped kind of streamline our development, but we also didn't have to worry about any type of packages or dependencies. Again, with this being a very large scale project and a very aggressive timeline with it, we wanted to kind of streamline how we would deploy it. And so if a user was on a different version of Dynamo, or maybe didn't have all the packages that we did, using this Python node or this Python approach, we could just copy and paste the code and do a Python code block. and they would be up and running. So in a way, it was for us to kind of flatten out or level out the deployment process.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Good questions. So at this point, we can start to pivot over to a live demo. I guess before we go there, I don't know if there are any questions from the chat, or we could do some more general model overview kind of before we start to unpack the demo here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start the demo. Looks like we're floating right along.
All right, great. So again, before we get too far along here, just to recap on the model setup here. So we've got an architecture model, and that is in this interiors model, it's a link. And that's got all of our rooms, our walls, and our doors. And then we also have this interior design model, and that's the model that we'll be in. That, again, has that FF&E, or the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So just a quick recap there. So let's hop down to here. So in this environment here, again, we've got this architecture model as a link. And this is, you might have seen earlier in the presentation, this is this test environment that we had set up. And we've got some rooms here, but these rooms are in that linked architecture model here, not within this interiors model. And here we have these furniture families, and they've got this parameter here, but these haven't been updated yet. So we don't quite know what room or what room number is associated with this table.
Especially when we're looking at a schedule, right? Which is much more common with furniture and fixtures.
Right, right. Where you might see something like this, I guess, but with these all filled out, So we've got our model set up. We've got the furniture here in these rooms. Now let's pull over to Dynamo. Let me see if I can grab this here. Sorry, I didn't realize we closed out here. I was doing a test run on Dynamo Studio earlier, and just to give it a run with these dialog boxes. So we'll fire up Dynamo here. And so this is that script that we had. So again, originally there was this string input from the user here, where you'd have to type out the architecture model name. And the thinking there is, you could imagine in an actual model, you'd have a link for mechanical, link for electrical, maybe a structural link. So they all kind of work in their own model. But Revit doesn't really know exactly which one is the architecture model, or which
yeah,
one.
And especially with consultant links, we get some really crazy names, right? Where they append the date and the Revit version and the name and project number and all kinds of stuff. So it can end up being really, really long. So I can definitely sympathize with that.
Yeah, and as Courtney had mentioned before, even within the office to kind of deploy it and spread that code, it's a little bit easier than having to type all that out. Just to have a dialog box that gets thrown up to the user. And over here we've got. Hang on one second here, guys. So over here we've got the. And pretty simple script from that standpoint. But again, the thinking was that if we manage all the code within this Python node, that if somebody was in a different version of Dynamo, that we wouldn't have to worry about managing those versions. We could just copy and paste the Python code into that node. They'd be off and running. So I guess we could just hit the run button here. Give it a go. And so here we see that dialog box pop up. So, again, if you had multiple links in here, we would see those links being populated. But in terms of the user input, you just have to check the box for which model you want to interact with. And, again, that personal soapbox. This is something I think, at least I haven't seen too much of, but it's definitely doable. So maybe an option for other scripts as well to implement some type of form user input. So we've got our architecture model selected here, and if we hit the go button and submit there, it's going to think for a second, and then these furniture families are now updated. So they're pulling in that information from the architecture link and updating the room name and the room number there. So I don't know at this point, Courtney, maybe if you want to talk for a minute about kind of distributing the script maybe within the office, or I think there have been a couple of other offices as well that have reached out about it.
So we've had quite a few projects use this so far, because this is a standard that we do. Is we have furniture model and our architecture model. We've also given several tutorials to our couple offices in Florida, in Atlanta, and then in Arlington. We've given the interior designers there a run through of how this works.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks maybe to, this thing kind of getting legs and trying to make it accessible. I hope maybe that's an overarching theme about it is, that Git by itself can be kind of intimidating. You could have a Git bash type command line interface, and that could be kind of intimidating, but hopefully trying to make this work more accessible, through GitHub Desktop and through, mitigating those package dependencies, and encouraging teamwork. That seems to be getting some traction. So could be applicable for other scenarios as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like we have a few questions coming in from the chat here. Looks like Christian has mentioned data shapes is a package for creating windows if people want to use UI nodes as well. And that's a very good point. Data shapes is a package that allows you to do functionality with pop-ups so that your user can interface with pop-ups. But once again, as Jeff pointed out, this gets into packages and dependencies and deployments and different versions and different things like that. But I definitely encourage you to look into data shapes, especially if you already have a package deployment or replication set up within your office. Definitely check that out. We also have Timon has a question. Can you say more about the benefits of going nearly all Python in Dynamo?
Sure. So definitely a bit more, I guess, in the technical side of the house, but at least for us in collaborating between the offices, it was a benefit where users, for example, in the Roanoke office, could be working on a function within that Python node, and users up in the Arlington office could be working on a different function. And so in that way, we're able to share and collaborate some of the work that we're doing. So we don't have to work kind of on top of each other. We can kind of split out the work in that way. But as the Roanoke office gets a little bit further along and maybe grabbing the information from the architecture model, and maybe as the Arlington office can work into writing those into the actual families, we can kind of share in that way. So from a development standpoint, we can kind of streamline our approach there. Again, managing packages isn't really an issue when we're using more of a Python style of development. And that sets you up as well then if you want to port that over into something, maybe into some type of a button or an add-in for PyRevit. That's certainly doable as well. And having more of maybe a code-centric library. So, that something that, other users can go in and maybe grab a function or tweak a function to do what they need it to in that way.
So how is it that, and I'm sorry, you guys blinked out for me on a second. Maybe if you answered this, just let me know. Dana, we just went through that. But how is it that would you say your users grab this Python to be copied and paste? Is this, you have a repository somewhere within your server? I know we have a comment here about internal packages, right? So AECOM could manage an internal package, which of course, you guys could ensure it doesn't have any dependencies, that, if it's just Python. I know that there's going to be some changes in 2.5, or there has been changes in 2.5 with the way that Python interacts with Dynamo. But of course, there's many different ways of how you could store this content, right? How do your users get to the Python?
Yeah, so right now there's really two main ways. And again, trying to break down those barriers. So in a perfect world, I think everybody would be using Git, but in some ways, I think that's kind of a dream. And so I'm going to fight to keep the dream alive. So there's certainly some users that they are more adept at Dynamo, and I think more open to using Git. So certainly we're keeping that avenue open. So we have our code hosted on repos, and they're able to engage with it in that way. But there are other users who are more familiar or comfortable in a more typical network or folder structure. So we have it hosted and duplicated there as well. So trying to break down those barriers in some ways, I think if it was perfect, it would all be streamlined. But the reality, I think, is that at least for now, we're managing it through both Git and through just a more typical folder structure.
So let's say that I don't want to make any generalizations here. Let's say that a user that is not familiar with Dynamo, that has no coding experience, is barely getting by in Revit, right?
Yep.
If they came to you and, Courtney, maybe even if they came to you and they said, Courtney, you ran that awesome thing last week that populated these two parameters. How do I do that? How would you advise them to go about it?
Yeah, I guess I might pivot at this point. Courtney, if you want to speak to it a little bit there.
So I've done this, I think, at least 3 times. We've got a couple users who work in Revit well, but Dynamo is just this completely foreign, over their head concept. And so it's really just getting them to open Dynamo. And I'll usually send them the link to where this Dynamo script is. I can get them to open it. I tell them, you've got 2 drop-down boxes and you just pick which model you're in and the quadrant and make sure it all lines up, and you just hit run. And I tell them, wait a couple minutes, it will do its thing, and you'll just see all the information start to populate. And I've rarely ever had someone come back to me a 3rd time and be like, hey, I completely forgot how to do this. Can you show me again?
If anything, they come back to you and they say, oh my gosh, Courtney, that saved me so much time. Thank you so much. I owe you coffee, right?
This was a process that used to take us 2 weeks, and it would be done in a couple of hours, maybe a day, the whole thing.
And of course, every 2 weeks, the architect's changing their stuff. So by the time you get it done, you're like, oh, now I have to go back and check it because something has changed. Definitely something's changed. So saving time all over the place throughout the entire process of the project, right?
Yeah, and maybe Dana, to kind of tack on to Courtney's point there. So I was curious about, rolling this into Dynamo Studio and or Dynamo Player over here. Sorry, I keep getting that turned around. And so, here, well, let's roll back. So we've got this family here without that updated, and certainly these dialog boxes are something that you could roll into this type of development, or maybe an extension, something that we didn't tackle on this one, but could be an option is, having a Dynamo Player script, which is referencing some external Python. And in that way, you don't really have to update the shell of that Dynamo Player script. You could just update that Python file, and it could be potentially a more dynamic workflow.
Jeff, I'm so proud of you. I told him, I said, all we need to do is join forces and we are going to be superheroes together solving world peace, right? And look at it, you did it. And this, of course, is very much the way that data shapes could also work for those of us who have deployed packages within our office. Check that out. Definitely can utilize data shapes with Dynamo Player. So great job there. Absolutely. And I think that this is definitely the way that we want our users to interface, right? It makes it so much easier rather than having to open up Dynamo and, do I do anything in here? Oh, okay. I just click run and then I can close it. Oh my goodness, I can close it. So I think that this interface makes it a little bit easier, especially as Courtney mentioned, if you guys just have a Dynamo script that saved somewhere, they can navigate to that folder location, run the script. They don't have to be in the scary wires and nodes land, right? So fantastic work. Fantastic work. All right. So Timon has another question. If Autodesk was watching, what would you want to ask them for future developments?
Oh gosh, that's a good question.
Where to begin, right?
Yeah, golly. Well, I think, you know, the baseline with this whole workflow, I think, was the room location point with the furniture families. So if there's some way to incorporate that functionality, I think that would be, you know, definitely something to look into. We wouldn't have to do any of this business if that was the case. You know, but outside of that, I think maybe taking a look at you know, how Python is integrated in Dynamo. I guess that's sort of a question, maybe just a general one.
Yeah, and check out 2.5. I haven't had a chance myself, but I know that there has been some background updates in the way that, and maybe we can get some people commenting and with more knowledge on that. But I know that there has been some differences in the way that Python is looking at some, or I'm sorry, Dynamo is looking at different things in there. So so hopefully they've already resolved some issues. You gotta get Revit 2021.
Right. Yeah. So this might be a good time as well. Courtney, I don't know if you can maybe speak to some of the challenges that we had that came up in terms of, you know, when we were working through it. You know, I remember the first time we sent it to you for testing, you know, it didn't really work, I think, the way that we were planning on it. But I don't know if you could take a minute to kind of talk about, maybe to take a step back and talk about some of the challenges that came up, or, you know, from your perspective, and talk a little bit about those.
So when we first got the script, I think it was originally just formatted for one of the smaller buildings. And that's when we added the node that would help us select which architectural building we were in so that we could go in between the models. I think our next challenge was once we got into the largest building, there was a architectural link within the architecture within the interior link. So we had to write a code around going to find each architecture link in the architecture model before we could even get it to run in interiors. And then I think after that run, we added the quadrants so I wouldn't have to sit there for an hour or two while it ran for that one large building.
Yeah, and I think maybe that speaks to, you know, that type of collaborative or live testing with it, where you know, in some ways this is sort of a, you know, a very nice testing environment. You know, all these rooms are, you know, numbered and named very nicely.
And bound, enclosed, right?
Right, exactly.
No warnings.
So, and I think maybe that's another plug for Git here, which is to say, you know, being able to collaborate between offices and distribute, you know, the code out in that way, we're able to test it a bit more quickly and a bit more robustly. And so, you know, and we can also find solutions a little bit faster too. So, you know, if it's a problem with maybe finding the right link, for example, if there are nested links, you know, that might be something that somebody in one office could work on. Or if it's, you know, filtering out by quadrants, maybe that's something, you know, somebody in a different office can work on. And then being able to share that knowledge together, and you know, as well, having that version control with Git, so we can kind of track and see how things are developing and roll back if we need to.
You guys are super lucky to have that type of environment, right? Where, you know, Jeff is creating the content, creating these awesome, you know, Python workflows, Dynamo workflows, and then Courtney can say, hey, it took me 10 minutes to run the script, right? How can we make it better? And I think that type of collaboration is absolutely key, right? And Jeff, I'm sure you can agree, what we as content creators of these types of workflows, we want to hear, right? We want to know, you know, our idea, our, you know, perfect world scenario is that we're making life easier for you. So if we can continue to make it easier for you, and encourage you to run the script even more, absolutely, we want to hear about it. So we have a few more questions coming in. Rob thinks he has a silly question. It's absolutely not a silly question. He says, there is a way to have a drop down in Dynamo Player for you to be able to select a link. I will say I've had some issues with this drop down. So I've found that when I select something in the drop down and I run the script, it resets to whatever is in the top of the drop down list, and maybe it's updated with the newer versions of of packages or what have you. But what I do as a resolution to this is I usually will just do a string dot contains, right? Because yes, these Revit link names are absolutely ridiculously long, but most likely not all of them have the word architecture or -a. Right. We can find something unique about those Revit link names. So I usually will use that where it just says, what's the Revit link name? And then I'll in parentheses say something unique about the Revit link name. Of course, the user could put the whole Revit link name if they wanted. But in the scenario that you have, Jeff and Courtney, you would really just need to put .rbt, right? Because you only have one link. So there are some different ways, Rob. Wonderful question that we can utilize Dynamo Player if, once again, you're going the Dynamo Player route. And of course, you are maintaining packages. There are probably ways as well for you to do that with some different out-of-the-box Dynamo nodes as well. As I mentioned in the chat, Steam Nodes has a wonderful package node called element.get from Revit. Element.get from linked file. So that will actually help you get elements based off their category across the Revit link. So shout out to Steam Nodes on that one. Another question from Marina here. What would you guys say is the most common way to start or learn Python language? Where can I start to understand how to use as a larger collective and how to access these solutions? Hopefully I asked that correctly, Marina.
Yeah, definitely a great question, Marina. I think there's a lot of great places to start online. I mean, a quick Google, learning Python, and you'll get, plenty of links to get started with. But I think writing a couple of functions, first outside of Dynamo or Python, just a quick hello world and, those types of things can be helpful to start to understand the language. And Python itself is pretty accessible. Certainly other languages like older development with Revit where you'd have to do like Visual Basic or C#, that type of development can be a bit more robust, but it's not quite as accessible as Python. Python's a bit more human friendly in that way. So I would recommend, finding a course online and stick with it, something you can kind of pluck away at for a couple of days. Pick some stuff up. And then when you feel pretty confident with that, try and bring it over into a Dynamo environment. That's something I think most people on this call, use Revit in some way, and that's a way that they can make it relevant for them, for themselves.
Awesome. And I would just feed in there, have a problem. This is a wonderful problem to solve, right? We all have an architectural link that we probably need to obtain some sort of data from, right? So if you have a problem, that's sometimes the best way. We found Revit has its limitations. Revit has many limitations. So having an issue that, Revit is having its pitfalls with, if you will, definitely will guide you toward the right way. And then you can feel like a superhero within your office.
Yeah, and I think as well that it gives you the freedom or the flexibility. The more involved you get with the API, I think the more comfortable you get, and you start to understand a bit more, I guess, under the hood of what's going on. And I think it helps you to have a better grasp or handle on, navigating the model in a way.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like we have answered all the questions. You guys did a wonderful presentation where it was so clear, minimal questions. Do you guys have any final thoughts or anything you guys want to wrap up with?
Might defer to Courtney here, I guess, if you have anything you want to share.
I'd just like to thank Jeff. I mean, this saved so much time, and we miss him in our office, but
Yeah, well, and likewise, I think maybe a parting thought, just as overarching themes, I think using Git to help work as a team, encouraging some of that collaboration, using those more visual tools like GitHub Desktop, as well as dialog boxes, trying to make it a bit more visual, because I think we're all visual people, at least in this industry, and as well, I think trying to make things a bit more accessible. I think those are kind of the overarching themes. So, and again, thanks to Courtney for coming up with the idea, and the team at Roanoke as well for working together.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful presentation, guys, and wonderful solution to a serious problem that we all face. So thanks again for giving us your time tonight and presenting.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for hosting, and thanks to Timon and everyone else for setting this up. It's been great.
Well, you guys have a wonderful night and stay safe.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.